Welcome to What's Best Forum's Masters and Makers interview series. Today we are meeting Damon Von Schweikert, CEO of Von Schweikert Audio. Damon, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Tell me about your organization. In addition to Leif Swanson, who do you have working with you there day to day?
Well, we have a small crew in the offices here where we do final assembly and QC and design. So we have a total of five people, including Leif and myself. Um, and then we have distributed production.
Who physically assembles the speakers? Do you do that in-house or do you outsource the assembly?
Oh, sorry, it's 100% in-house. So basically, we have a distributed marketing or manufacturing. Like I said, we build it all here in the U.S. So we have a cabinet shop that's a couple blocks away. We've been working with for well over a decade, and um, and then the paint that we use is 30 minutes away. He's a master painter for a well-known um, uh, uh, guitar manufacturer. He does all their custom work, and he does all our custom work too, which is our speakers. And then we buy parts, as you know, from either the U.S. or Europe. But it's all tested here. It's all built here.
How do you describe Von Schweikert Audio's sonic philosophy? What are you hoping your client achieves when you place your speakers in their listening room?
Our slogan is the sound of reality. It started with my dad when he was in Caltech, and he theorized that the purpose of a loudspeaker is to inversely decode what a microphone encodes as accurately as possible, reproducing the recorded event. Ultimately, we want you to experience um, all the music that's recorded, whatever recording you're listening to, and to be present in the space, not to have them in your room, the musicians or whatever. We want you to experience the recorded event in the setting and environment it was in. So if it's an outdoor event, you should have all the ambiance and audio cues that you would expect from being there present when it was recorded.
I would describe that as you're trying to achieve you are there as opposed to they are here.
Correct. I guess
Okay.
that's a simple way of saying it. Yeah.
That does not change by genre of music. For example, some people like the concept of always achieving you are there, but for other
Hmm.
genres of music, maybe solo vocalist with a guitar, they like the achieving the objective of they are here. But in your view, the objective is always to achieve you are there, whether it's a small cabaret venue or a giant concert hall.
Well, yeah. I
Okay.
mean,
Okay.
if the speaker, yeah. I mean, if
Okay.
the speakers are unable to achieve the you are there, then then it fails in every category. But if sometimes you're in a studio and you get the sense of the blackness and everything that a studio provides, which is wonderful, but there's still audio cues, that you're picking up, that are the psychoacoustics are always in the recordings, whatever the recorded event is, and that's the beauty of it. You'll have some recordings that don't have a lot of ambiance, but you're still hearing cues to the room, or how the mic is set up, or how they're positioned. So they'll be present in your room. Yeah.
The Ultra 55 cabinet is 1 inch MDF, 1 inch high density fiberboard, and then 3/4 inch artificial stone, I believe. How did you come up with that particular sandwich of materials?
Uh, Over time, our first multi-layer cabinet was produced in we started experimenting. My dad, I shouldn't say we. I was quite young. My dad started experiencing it in the experimenting with it in the late 70s. But our first production model that I can think of that incorporated constrained layer dampening and multi-layer damping was the VR4. Very popular design, came out in the early to mid 90s, and that incorporated multiple layers of material to because there's a lot of, well, basically there's a lot of ways to damp the cabinet or damp the material, but the problem is that from a marketing standpoint, people try and keep it simple. Well, I make it out of this material. This material is resonates at a higher frequency, so therefore it's damp. But the fact of the matter is that there's a more elegant solution to how you damp your cabinet, and you're dealing with Q factors, so it has to do with the construction of the cabinet, how many, the surfaces that you have that are unbraced, and then how you deal with those different resonances. But by breaking up your cabinet into a different configuration where you're not going to have any two surfaces that are identical. And by having multi-layer damping along with constrained layer damping, we use proprietary materials in between our synthetic stone and the outer shell of the cabinet that absorb. So all these parts of the cabinet are resonating at different Q factors, and they're not resonating at the same frequency, and therefore creating that disruption. So it's a very elegant way of dealing with that challenge.
What sonic differences do you hear between ceramic drivers and paper drivers?
I hear slowness and cone resonance, and I don't hear a clean wave launch with paper. We've used paper years ago. We're agnostic when it comes to materials. If you look at our designs over the decades, we've gone from paper to polypropylene to reinforced polypropylene, carbon fiber, woven carbon fiber, magnesium, aluminum, um, and beryllium and ceramic. But uh, from our experience, and I think what we're demonstrating with our ceramic coned loudspeakers is that it's pure, it's fast. The wave launch is critical. It needs to stop as quickly as possible. And when I use the word distortion, I'm sorry, I should clarify this. I'm talking about distorting the signal. I'm not talking about like distortion that people normally hear in electronics or being overdriven, that type of thing. I'm talking about anything that distorts the signal. And so having a fast start and stop on your wave launch is critical, because otherwise you have overhang and you start to induce blurring, slowness, and it's audible. So yeah, ceramic, in my opinion, is one of the finest. Not the only one. We like magnesium too, but we find that the ceramic is much faster, and integrates very well with the drivers we've chosen.
You've chosen the beryllium tweeter as opposed to a soft dome or a ribbon tweeter. I know you have the ribbon super tweeter. Why beryllium cone instead of a soft dome?
I am agnostic when it comes to materials. The difference between silk dome and beryllium, it's something that you have to, as a designer, we're on the driver of the month club with all the leading manufacturers. So when they have a new design, we get them in here and we test them out. That's how we're constantly, even when we're producing now, we're constantly looking for anything that would be superior and might fit into our designs for the future. And the silk domes are wonderful. They have their application, but like paper, they just don't have the speed and clarity um, of of the berylliums. It's funny that you're asking about beryllium and uh, what we're doing with ceramic, because I remember when my dad came out with the VR55, it was the first speaker we ever launched with beryllium and ceramic, and as you can see, that's kind of fed into what we call our ultraline VR line. People would come into the show and they would look at the speaker and immediately tell me, "Oh, I don't like ceramic drivers, or I don't like beryllium." And I'd say, "Oh, why not?" Well, they sound this way and they sound that way. And so my first response, before they even sit down, I say, "Well, how does this sound?" And they go in and sit down. They come back, "Well, I'm not hearing those things." So I understand that people develop an idea of what something is. I would say that for the people that are concerned about ceramic and beryllium, you should listen to our speakers, because my comment would be, yeah, I've heard the things that they're talking about in other designs. I don't think ours have that, because we're implementing them properly.
I think it's
Um,
important for audiophiles to understand that typically implementation trumps materials.
yes, of course.
What is the purpose of the super tweeter? Is it for audio information or to reproduce phase information?
It's for both. I mean, basically, you know, people often say, and I think they're correct, that you don't really hear the super tweeter when it's turned on, but after listening for a while, you hear it when it's gone. Because if you turn it off, you're like, what happened? So there's a lot of audio cues. I know people can argue about what what the human ear brain mechanism, or what the human hearing is capable of. But I will tell you that in blind listening tests, there's There's very little inaccuracy in people being able to discern when the super tweeters are moved. So there's clearly an effect. Again, I'm going to reach back to psychoacoustics. We began learning how to hear in the womb. Our ear brain mechanism works on a level that we're not consciously aware of. And when you're walking down the street, you're constantly analyzing things. You'll hear music and you'll know if it's coming from a car with its windows down or if the windows are up. When you're in back when we had department stores, you'd know whether the piano was coming from the speakers overhead or from a piano next to the escalators, right? And whether it was real or recorded. So your brain is analyzing all this stuff, and it does analyze that information as well. And if anyone has a question about it, we'd be happy to demonstrate by having them listen and then turn off the super tweeters to hear the difference.
On
So
your website, you say, quote, using a rear-firing mid-range treble driver to replicate the radiation pattern of Omni mics, Von Schweikert ambience retrieval system illuminates the room with spherical sound waves. I understand that. What's the reason for using a front-facing dome and a rear-facing dome rather than a dipole firing to the front and to the back to achieve that spherical sense?
we've done dipoles. That rear tweeter, the way it's implemented with the air network, it is giving that extra information, kind of like the super tweeter, where you can turn it off. It's attenuated, but it does give the proper polar response with the wave launch. The dipole, it does a polar response, but not in the frequency range that are critical.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes people have too much, they go too low in that frequency band. So it actually is disruptive to the wave launch because it's crossing over into the front.
And is that why you use the dome tweeter in the first place in addition to the ribbon? You could use the ribbon in a wider frequency range implementation and avoid one crossover.
We don't fear crossovers. Whether you're crossing over one or three, yes, it's more complex, or five drivers, it's more complex. But if you understand the process of properly crossing over, you can have 13 drivers, like our Ultra 11, and you can stand a foot away and you don't hear individual drivers. You hear one wave launch. So that's exactly what we're doing with the rear. Now, we actually have models. I think the Ultra 9 and the Ultra 11 both have um, a horn-loaded magnesium dome tweeter as part of the rear array. They have ribbons as well as that. So it just depends on the model. But you're right. We use the ribbon in all of our models, and then in the highest level, we have the magnesium cone and the ribbon combined.
Why do you feel box speakers achieve a more convincing illusion of live music than horns or dipole speakers?
My dad experimented with everything. He's used planars and horns and everything in reference and in comparison. He's built and designed them. Leif has as well. And what we found is that our whole philosophy, like I said, is to not introduce distortion into the playback. Okay, and distortion of the signal. Um, if your ultimate goal is to achieve proper playback, efficiency is an artifact of your design. It's not the main goal. If your main goal is efficiency, then you're going to compromise on the 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 accuracy of the playback. So we shoot for accuracy, not efficiency. It's like I said, it's just a side effect. And for accuracy, we want to be able to start and stop that wave launch immediately. We want it to. We don't want overhang. We don't want bloat. And we use dynamic home drivers in a box configuration, and then how we damp that material, or I should say how we deal with the inverse wave launch. And we want to make sure that cabinet is not introducing that wave back onto the phone, because then it's not going to stop accurately, right? It's not going to wave launch accurately. So we developed a very complicated way of damping that rear wave launch or even dissipating it. We have
Okay, but now you're talking about
APR.
how to mitigate the problems of a box speaker.
Right,
I'm asking,
right. Well, that's what we say. We're saying that we have control over it.
okay,
With other speaker designs, um, that are trying to achieve other things, they don't have that control. Either they're letting it out and then
Hmm.
their cavity is dealing with it, or it's going back into the
Hmm.
room and it's hitting the wall and it's affecting the wave launch.
Right.
So like I said, our thing is about accuracy, and that's why we use the cabinets we do, and we design them with the damping we do so that we can control that wave launch from start to stop, not just start, but also stop.
But why can't a highly efficient, sensitive driver also be accurate?
Well, I didn't say that. I
Okay.
said that if you can have a highly accurate, you can have an accurate driver that is also highly efficient.
Okay.
But but the efficiency again is the secondary, as you stated. It needs to be accurate first. Efficiency is a secondary thing. I think that companies that focus on efficiency are trying to achieve something differently than we are.
Mhm. How important do you feel is mid-range driver surface area to transparency and realism?
Our focus on any design, we start with the mid-range, of course. It's the most it's the most perceptible driver in the in your design. So, we have a philosophy of how we implement and how we select mid ranges. But surface cone area is not the critical element for us. It depends on the design. Ultimately, accuracy is what we're looking for first. And if we're able to achieve that with a smaller uh, surface area, um, all the better. Like I said, the surface area to me is a side effect. Transducer designers may have different ideas about that, and I think that's important for them to understand how they achieve their individual designs. But as a loudspeaker manufacturer, I benefit from all of their work collectively, and I get to decide which designs interests us the most, and we can create a proper crossover design from top to bottom, you know, on based on that mid range. So
Have
I guess to answer your question,
Mhm.
I don't think it's as critical as the accuracy.
Have you and Leif ever considered fabricating your own drivers?
We have drivers made by leading manufacturers that are made to our spec and brought in. Not all of them, but where necessary, yeah. In order to achieve one of our designs, it might require an element of modification from an existing design.
Have you ever evaluated or considered field coil drivers instead of permanent magnet drivers?
I haven't personally. You'd have to ask Leif how much experience he's had with that, and I know my dad did, but
Hmm.
ultimately we ended up where we did with the drivers we're using now. Like I said, I haven't personally, but I know Leif is. We have a area in the factory called the driver graveyard, and that's where all these samples go to stay in case 5 years later we want to pull one out. Oh my gosh, this would go great, great with that for this design. So there's like I said, you have to talk to Leif. I know he's been very busy with our current designs, and he's still working on a couple more. But he does a lot of experimentation both here at the office and at home.
Why do you use rear firing woofers?
Talking about the way we implement the subwoofers,
Yes.
the 9 and the 11 specifically were designed to be flagship loudspeakers that were, the whole reproduction was of the recorded event could be done in a single cabinet. So in those two designs, because you're asking specifically about that, if your goal is accuracy, you can implement and you use the same design choices of driver. So you want a fast start and stop, you want control. When we have the 11 that has two 15s in the back and the 9 that has a single 15 in the back, you have a whole control suite of how you implement it: volume, amplitude, phase, crossover. And oftentimes, we ship the speakers flat from the factory, but oftentimes the room is going to end up in is ultimately going to determine how good or how bad that speaker can perform. And the subwoofer elements in that design, I won't talk about the other controls for the tweeters, but the subwoofer element that design is to achieve the fastest, tightest response dependent on the room. So there are times where you need to cancel the wave launch from the front, and you achieve that through the implementation of the woofer in the rear. Sometimes, if a room is sucking up energy, you have to reinforce. It just depends on the room. Ultimately, you kind of decide where those speakers are going to go in the room, whether they're, from a visual standpoint or from a practical standpoint of like the sound stage you want. You move them where you want them, and then regardless of how the bass is performing, you can now adjust the bass through the implementation of the rear woofer to make it the most accurate linear wave launch from that point in the room.
But you can have that adjustability and so on in a subwoofer with a front firing
Mhm.
design. I'm focusing on the reason for the rear firing. I can understand you
Well,
want mechanically one cabinet. I can understand you don't want to build a 9 or 10 foot tall loudspeaker, but
mhm.
do you not believe that there's any sonic disadvantage to have the rear firing subwoofers?
It depends on the room.
Uh-huh.
No, I don't. But it depends on the room. There's some rooms where it's more difficult to dial it in. But the truth is that, you know, because the cabinet's fixed, you're going to have there's going to be a limit to how much you can adjust to rectify for the room, but it's much greater than you're going to get with a passive design. You're going to have much more
Right,
flexibility.
but I'm not
But
focusing on active. I'm not
I
focusing
know
on active versus passive. I'm focusing on rear
you can,
firing.
like I said, yeah, rear firing. I wouldn't do it for a higher frequency range, but
Hmm.
because the subwoofer level and woofers in general have a spherical wave launch, and because you have a control of the phase of that rear driver, you can dial it in perfectly.
So
Even though it's rear wave launch.
I would have thought there would have to be some sonic compromise to have the low frequencies firing the wrong way, but you're saying you actually treat it as an advantage in terms of adjustment to the room?
Absolutely. I mean, we wouldn't. Let me put it this way: we wouldn't implement it if it wasn't successful. That's one thing I think people need to understand is, you know, the designs that we do, they're thought out, and these rear firing subs in our flagships, we implemented them for the first time in 2004 in the Ultra 9, sorry, the VR9
Hmm.
in the VR11. These are designs that have been around for, almost 2 decades, and implemented and reiterated on. And so what we're selling now is uh, the culmination of 20 years of design and iteration. So, if they didn't work, well, we bring them to all the shows. If they didn't work, I think we would have experienced the practical failure a long time ago, right? So, and we certainly wouldn't be winning the awards that we're winning at shows.
How do you perform voicing in your design process? You touched on it in terms of agnostic selection of drivers. What is the voicing
Right.
process you undergo?
Voicing starts with the cabinet design. It starts with the use of signal path. It starts with the not just your crossover um, structure or architecture, but also the selection of materials that go into that, right? And ultimately, uh, voicing. So voicing starts at the beginning of the process, but it culminates at the end when you have everything put together. So you have your cabinets and your heavy architecture, and you're listening to it. What's important is that we only have so many tools. The tools that we have right now for designing and measuring are all they're all objective. They measure volume, and they don't measure quality of sound. So voicing is that part where you listen to everything, because you can have the exact same network, same cabinet, everything, exact same network architecture, but different materials in that architecture. And even though they're the same values, it's going to and it will the impedance will measure identical. It will sound like two different speakers. Voicing is material selection, and the part that is important is the steering of the voicing. I know that a lot of people, it's easy, including myself, to get hooked on resolution. And you can, in my opinion, you can take a design way too far down the path of resolution. It's important not to lose the natural musical element that you're trying to reproduce. And I personally believe that is a spectrum between between resolution and musicality, or you could call it coloration, right? And so you don't want to have a highly colored speaker. It may be very musical. It may work with a lot of equipment, but ultimately it has a voice now. It's distorting the signal. So it's very important to find that balance between getting as much resolution while still being musical. An example, a practical example, is if you ever have the chance to walk up to a quartet of musicians and you're literally standing next to them, have you ever said, "Oh, listen to those highs"? You would never say that. That's not what it is to listen to live music.
Right.
So, ultimately my goal is to not have people come in. I mean, you may say, wow, it's really clear up there, whatever. That's just part of our nature. It's how we communicate what we're hearing. But if it's suddenly grabbing you, oh, listen to those highs, I'm worried that design might fail in other areas. So
Do
yeah,
you
so voicing is very critical.
do you aim for an objectively measured flat frequency in-room response?
Yeah, I mean, it's important. Absolutely. There are designs out there that don't measure that way and are pleasant to listen to and very adaptable to different situations. There's a coloration that you can have that's a pleasing coloration.
You're
Yeah,
postulating a roll-off.
right. Or a smile or whatever, works with the drivers that they've implemented. But no, I think, like I said, our goal is accuracy. So we need a linear frequency response. If you look at our website, you'll see that we have very low margins of variance between our frequency responses, and they get smaller as you go up the line. There needs to be some room treatment, and our dealers know how to deal with that and how to adjust for it. But don't want it to be overly damped. So yeah, the frequency response in the room is critical.
What is the next new product we should expect from Von Schweikert? What's going on in the R&D department there?
We've just completed and we're beginning to ship, and I haven't even done the PR for. Uh, we completely redesigned our Shockwave line of loudspeakers, or our subwoofers, I should say. So we're on the Shockwave Mark IIs. The main improvement is, well, instead of a sealed enclosure, we now have a slotted enclosure. So we're going to have a deeper, faster, more accurate bass response. And then we've got a new amplifier design,
Mhm.
which is wonderful, and it's far lower in distortion and much more accurate and faster.
Is that amp you're talking about Class D or Class AB?
No, it's plastic,
Okay.
but it's like I said, it's in that frequency range. It's very effective for its application.
Damon, thank you very much for joining me today. This has been fun.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And if you've enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the What's Best Forum YouTube channel.